So once again, welcome back, everybody. And I hope that everyone had a nice lunch and was able to enjoy some of the networking. And it's great now to have you all back with us here for the third session of this year's conference. So the next session is going to follow a similar format to the previous one. We're going to be hearing some introductions from some policy speakers. We're then going to have an industry roundtable. And then we're going to be hearing again the conclusions from our policy speakers towards the end of the session. The session is going to be focusing on ensuring European capabilities in space. And we've given it the slightly provocative title of Are We Doomed to Dependence? So to discuss this and to introduce our panelists, I'd like to now pass over to our moderator for the session, Thierry Lefort from PwC Strategy And. Thierry, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thierry Lefort from Strategy And, a consulting firm in strategy, part of the PwC network. So I've been working in the terrestrial and satellite industry for nearly more than 20 years, and addressing both sectors, satellite and terrestrial. So having a good understanding of the ecosystem and helping the industry basically navigate those the challenges, but also the opportunities in the satellite world and the broader sector. I worked across Europe, also the US, in Eastern countries and the Middle East. And I've worked with various type of industry players, from satellite operators down to upstream, downstream manufacturers, in the data analytics as well, remote sensing, and done a few analyses as well for launcher companies and GNSS markets, I should not forget. I've worked also for the European Space Agency, and for instance, helped the European Space Agency develop the Atlas program, which was an in-orbit validation program to test new technology. This session is about ensuring European capabilities in space. And there was a bit of a provocative thought, are we doomed? And that's probably coming from the advances we see from other regions, which have been quite a big step in recent times. So as part of the EU space program, Europe is working on technological advancement in space to develop autonomous capabilities and critical technologies. And it's even more important now that there are some geopolitical tensions. It's important actually to think of sovereignty of Europe, sovereignty of the nations, and understand how can we keep a competitive edge in that environment. So we will look at key technical capabilities such as the launcher, surveillance as well, remote sensing. We'll look at communications. We'll look at the competition as well, which is strengthening across the space sector. And we'll look at the measures that are needed actually to ensure the future independence of the sector, but also of the European capabilities and infrastructure. Before I give the floor to the panelists, who are mostly from the commercial sector, I'd like to invite to speak for us two institutional representatives. One is from the European Space Agency, Torben Eriksen, Acting Director of Technology, Engineering and Quality at ESTEC, therefore the European Space Agency. And I will also introduce Isabella Poldrugo, Deputy Head of Space Policy Unit at the DG DEFIS of the European Commission, and both will give their perspective on the institutional context of dependence, independence.
Thank you very much, Thierry. Ladies and gentlemen, and dear space colleagues, I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon. I'm very pleased to see you all in what I normally call 3D instead of the 2Ds that we have been becoming used to over the last couple of years. As you know, ESA is not only policy and institutional, ESA is also programs, space programs, and technology. And of course, as the Director of Engineering and Technology, dependence and technology is not new for us, so I feel myself a little bit on home ground. Now, the main question for the session, as was mentioned by Thierry, is, are we doomed to dependence? Let me start the discussion by saying, no, we are not, but we need to take action now. Are we faced with dependency? Do we have a lack of resilience in our space supply chains and infrastructure? I postulate, yes, we do in a number of areas, and I'll come back to this in a minute. In fact, the topic of this third session of today is very relevant for ESA, because in about 4 weeks from now, ESA member states, all 22, will meet, the ministers of the member states will meet in Paris for our ministerial council. That is the council which decides our funding for the coming years. And this ministerial, it will set the agenda for ESA for the next decade, and it will offer Europe a chance to tackle some of the upcoming challenges that we're discussing here today: dependency, resilience, and very important, global competitiveness of our space industry. In fact, I will postulate that the coming years are going to be crucial for European space. We are at what we could mention as an economical and political turning point for European space. If we want to achieve independence and autonomy, now is the time to act. Already for some decades now, European excellence and industrial space capabilities have been pushed and developed by ESA and the EU, covering a whole spectrum of technologies and space applications. Let me mention a few: independent access to space, technology sovereignty, Earth observation, climate observation, development of systems with both civil and security applications, and of course, last but not least, world-class STEM, inspiring many, many European students to engage in space. If we want to grow European space, the big challenge, maybe the biggest challenge for us, will be to have enough hands on deck. It will be to stimulate young engineers to join us in our space ecosystems, in our space endeavors. As I mentioned before, dependence is not a new word for us in the space sector. ESA, the Commission, EDA, SME for space, and you, the European space industry at large, we have been working together for some years in defining and addressing dependency in our space programs. We have, however, been very much focusing on the impact of export restrictions. Now, following the 24th of February, the geopolitical situation has resulted in an immediate, critical, wide-reaching dependency covering raw materials, components, subsystems, and even launchers. And we will be talking about this further this afternoon. And all of this further underlining the criticality of the dependence and the need for action. For Europe to be successful in space, to effectively address the dependency, to establish resilience in our space industry and supply chains, and to achieve a globally competitive space sector, we must, I underline, we must establish a coordinated institutional Europe for space with a focused governance reflecting a vision for European autonomy with leadership and responsibility. Rajat was referring to this already in his keynote speech this morning. We need to create new market opportunities. Debris was mentioned, and zero debris was mentioned this morning as one opportunity. In-orbit service is another opportunity. We need to accelerate the economic growth in space. we need to address the non-dependence and at the same time build up resilience and competitiveness. Collaboration and cooperation are key words, institutionally and private. European science excellence can only be achieved by building and sharing knowledge. Moreover, I strongly believe that a prerequisite for us in Europe to be able to develop innovative technologies to establish a sustainable, resilient, competitive space industry is that our space-related spendings, institutionally as well as private, must increase, and they must increase significantly. Not only for technology or industrialization of technology, but also for the programs that are using the technology. Let me give you some examples with some numbers. Today, the European public spending for space accounts for about 0.05% of the European GDP and about 0.11% of the total public spending. Now, surely we can all agree that there's no doubt that space activities goes far beyond these very, very small numbers. On the positive side, private investment are showing interest in space. $15 billion in 21, and of which only, and I say only 600 million euros were invested in European space SMEs. With the Ministerial 22, ESA wants to support the European space industry in all its shapes and sizes, providing access to expertise, technology, funding, and equally important, customers. The activities that we are proposing in the CM22 package are all building on the priorities that we have defined in our Agenda 2025, with a goal to reinforce Europe's position as a space leader. That means, first and foremost, very strong ESA-EU relations, space program challenges, boost innovation, innovative technology developments, autonomy and sovereignty, unlock new commercial growth markets. I mentioned a couple of examples a couple of minutes ago. And equally important and somewhat new for us is to boost the commercialization. Let me underline that the ESA, in its CM22 package and program proposal, we are acting to ensure that these are tailored and fully coherent with EU space programs, and therefore delivers benefits to all our member states. Let me give you one example of in our CM22 package, which will be addressing technology dependence, namely our initiative on EEE components, electrical, electronic, electromechanical, where we are aiming at ensuring European sovereignty in the domain of EEE components and related manufacturing and qualification facilities. EEE components, as you all know, are fundamental building blocks of our spacecraft. About 50% of the EEE components that we are flying on our spacecraft, we procure outside Europe, which adds up to a value above 50% because we are buying high-end components. It cannot be like this. It cannot remain like this. The value chain for these components is very complex, and it cannot be established in Europe without institutional support. And note that when doing this, we are not only benefiting the value chain, the ones that are manufacturing the EEE components, but certainly also the ones that are using the EEE components in our space systems, subsystems, and spacecraft. We are aiming at what we call a seamless development of each technology line, and this will achieve a shorter time to application, a shorter time to space. This clearly is a long-term undertaking which cannot be funded entirely through ESA programs, and hence it must be implemented hand in hand in coordination with the Commission and related national undertakings. Only then can we achieve what we set out to achieve and be successful. The situation in Europe for EEE is critical, and we need to start now, and hence our focus in the program will be on the most critical areas of the high-end components. Similar initiatives are needed in other areas. You're all aware of this: propulsion, electrical propulsion, composite materials, and in many other areas. All these considerations that I have mentioned make a strong case for what I call a strengthened collaboration between institutional and commercial players, and for a coordinated push for infrastructure and capabilities that can improve our resilience on Earth, but equally important in space. With this, I will end my part of the introduction to what is going to be a very interesting session, no doubt. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Isabella Poldrugo, and I'm Deputy Head of Unit for Space Policy at the European Commission in the DG DEFIS. I'm also very honored to be here with you today and with the people that is connect from home or from their offices. And I would like to bring forward the main activities of the European Commission in the regard of resilience and non-dependence in the space sector. In Europe, we have the creativity, the talents, and the research and innovation capacity. In Europe, we are not lagging behind. The European Union space infrastructure are state-of-the-art and deliver worldwide recognized top-level services and navigation, positioning, and Earth observation. And to admit that I joined the Commission quite recently, but before COVID, and when I arrived, there was already a huge work done to promote the resilience of the European supply chain in space, the resilience of space infrastructure, and to support the flourish and the competitiveness of the space ecosystem. In fact, we have a strong and competitive industrial base, but we need to ensure that Europe remains a major space power. European excellence must be reflected in the whole value chain, from critical raw material to space applications. In fact, the space sector is clearly undergoing a massive transformation and is also facing extraordinarily turbulent times. This is linked to a rapid rise in commercial activities, changing the business model of space companies. Moreover, in a very short time, the pandemic, climate change, Russian wars against Ukraine, and the energy crisis have profoundly transformed global geopolitics. All this has intensified the global race for resources, impacting the productivity of the European space sector and undermining the resilience of the EU space value chains. For Europe to maintain its leadership in space, we must rethink our resilience, our technology dependence, and our business models. In concrete terms, first, we need to continue to boost innovation through our research programs, Horizon Europe, and strengthen the traditional space industry in Europe with new blood from new space players. Indeed, the support to SMEs and startups in all the aspects of space policies, from launchers and satellite to up and downstream services, is a central piece of the Commission approach. It is in the public and private interest to ensure that entrepreneurs are able to flourish in Europe and do not have to seek funding and financing and the future for their business elsewhere. In all these fronts, the Commission is changing the way it does space in Europe. Involving new space actors is key for ensuring EU leadership in space sector and avoid falling behind other players. With the collaboration of different players, such as the European Investment Fund, EUSPA, ESA, the Commission is taking concrete action to support the emergence of new commercial actors. By accessing risk capital, mobilizing more than €1 billion in the next years with the implementation of the Cassini initiative. By including new space actors in European space flagships, proposing a more dynamic and open approach to procurement. For example, together with ESA, we launched the Copernicus Dynamic Purchasing System that will help to reduce administrative burden for companies and contribute to reduce time to contract. The Commission and ESA are acting as reference for the launcher sector, thanks to the European Flight Ticket Initiative, which allows new technologies to be validated in orbit under real condition and brought to market more quickly. Second, we need to look more broadly and we need to intensify our efforts to increase the resilience of strategic autonomy. As it was said before, we are in a globalized market for critical assets, so we need to ensure that Europe has access to critical raw materials and critical technologies that are required for the resilience of the EU value chains and open strategic autonomy. The urgency of delivering of this priority is further highlighted by the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian aggression against Ukraine in the global supply chains, including for the aerospace and defense one. To this end, the President of the Commission, von der Leyen, announced, now is 1 month ago, in the State of the Union address, that we are preparing the European Critical Raw Material Act to ensure the secure and sustainable access to raw materials without which our industrial and twin transition ambition and our collective resilience are at risk. And we are working very hard to be sure that the needs of the space and defense ecosystem are taken into consideration, as well as the use of space data to implement the new policy. Additionally, the Commission will increase the financial participation to important projects of common European interest and is pushing to create a new European Sovereignty Fund to make sure that the future of industry is made in Europe. The fund might be used to address critical dependencies or a top-up for a specific industrial project to accelerate the implementation and improve European autonomy. These efforts build on existing and ongoing work, such as the action plan on synergies between civil, defense, and space industries and the Observatory for Critical Technologies. The observatory that the Commission is setting up will identify, monitor, and assess critical technologies for space, defense, and related civic sectors, addressing their potential application and related value and supply chain, and will develop roadmaps to assess the criticalities. We need also to work on the resilience in space and from space. In fact, the Russian anti-satellite missile tests back 1 year ago, as well as the recent sabotage of Nord Stream, has demonstrated even more the urgency to protect our critical infrastructure, including the space one, and to support the resilience of critical infrastructure at national level. It is therefore necessary to adopt a holistic approach to, on one hand, strengthen the resilience and the protection of the EU space asset, but also on the other hand, to promote a more structured use of the space-based data for better surveillance and protection of critical assets in other sectors. This is the approach that the Commission put forward to Member States in our recent proposal to our Council recommendation on protection of critical infrastructure. Because critical space assets, as Copernicus and Galileo, can support Member States in monitoring national infrastructure, and as the grids, energy grids, or digital nets or transport that may be affected by earthquakes or volcano eruption, but also by man-made threats. Space assets can be further used to develop other surveillance options. As an example, Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service recently provided estimates of the flux of methane resulting from the Nord Stream leaks using the atmospheric modeling capabilities. Therefore, the importance of space infrastructure and of space-based services is essential for our security and defense. The forthcoming EU space strategy for security and defense will propose concrete action to strengthen the collective level of resilience, looking at all relevant angles, from skills to international cooperation and value chains. The objective of the strategy will be to define a common European response to current and future threats to our space infrastructure and to ensure the EU space assets meet also the needs of defense users. Consolidating of our existing assets while developing new ones to face current and emerging challenges is the new way to move forward. This, of course, includes further evolution of our flagships as Galileo and Copernicus, as well as the upcoming Secure Connectivity Program and the EU space traffic management approach. Regarding Copernicus, for example, the Commission is modernizing both the infrastructure and the service. In fact, Copernicus Security and Emergency Services have already proven their efficiency increase in management through border surveillance, maritime surveillance, and support to the Union Extra Action Service, as well as in providing timely and accurate geospatial information for emergency needs. But increased security threats and instability in which we are living ask for appropriate tools. In this respect, the Commission is considering the role of Hub observation for governmental and resilience services in support of increasing governmental needs in the security domain. At the European level, we must have an autonomous Earth observation infrastructure, as well as be autonomous in our ability to analyze the state of our planet and deliver service, in particular for public missions. I will mention also access to space, because it's essential that the Union has an autonomous, reliable, and cost-effective access to space for Europeans' current and future space initiatives. It's a key enabler and indispensable element in the space ecosystem and value chain. It is critical to ensure Europe's freedoms of action, non-dependence, and security, and remaining competitive in a changing global market. I think that the Russian aggression against Ukraine is one of the examples, with the Russian agency Roscosmos suspended the collaboration with the European partners. Galileo launch that was planned for April has not taken place, as well as the following one in September. The decision has no consequence on the continuity and quality of Galileo, EGNOS, and Copernicus, as well as on the continuing development. However, the war has highlighted our dependencies and vulnerabilities, in particular in access to space. And it's imperative now to work for the development of Galileo, EGNOS, and Copernicus, and future initiatives as a secure connectivity one. It is crucial that the Union continues to access to reliable, cost-effective, flexible launch services. And this is why, for the first time, we are using the EU budget to support the European launcher industry in the full value chain, from earliest research on new propulsion technologies to established partners and new space actors, securing long-term contracts for the launches for the European Union needs. A European Union initiative, as Cassini, what we mentioned before, we are developing together with ESA the European Flight Ticket Initiative that aims at accelerating the availability of sustainable EU micro-launcher solutions. Last but not least, was mentioned before the importance to have talent and skills in Europe. This is why we develop the Path for Skills for the space, aeronautics, and defense ecosystem in order to drive the green, digital, and resilient transition. And to this end, the President of the Commission announced that next year will be the year of education and training. And this represents a unique opportunity to build on existing work, such as the 2020 Commission initiative Pact for Skills, which aims to address skills shortfalls in the key industry actors in the EU, including space, and to support education and skills for the EU space sector, in particular downstream. All these activities are expected to build bridges and fill the gaps between academia, training center, and industry, with a view to equip future professionals with the necessary skill set needed to succeed in a career in the space sector. Commissioner Breton underlined that the European Union should neither be about autarky or non-independence, but about open strategic autonomy. The space sector is critical for the European Union's autonomy. For this reason, a number of space activities that are critical to the security of our people and our networks, we are working to ensure that such essential function can be performed in a secure way. To conclude, the EU space program and the activities of the European Union in the space domain are a lever for prosperity, development, and security in Europe, and enable for green, digital, and resilient transition in the EU economy and society. But it's very important that us, policymakers, industry, startups, investors, academia, students, users, we all need to mobilize together to forge a European new space, a new way of doing space in Europe, encompassing established companies as well as new players, and maintaining Europe as a major space power. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabella and Torben. So essentially, we have around the table, as I mentioned, 5 industry representatives. The first thing I would like to mention here is that, let me just, so I can see my guests here. Essentially, we heard about 3 topics, and thank you very much for these views, institutional views on the programs that you're running, the policies you are setting up. But essentially, when it comes to dependence, we heard 3 things. One is about resilience of European critical infrastructure, and it means different things to commercial than to institutions. Non-dependence, And in fact, commercial, I'll be interested to know, how the commercial players can contribute to building the infrastructure, European infrastructure, especially the critical ones. Non-dependence, that's a second topic that we heard, on foreign powers, on supply chains. And again, here it means something to institutions, it means something else to the commercial players. I'll also be interested to understand their views. And last, the third point is competitiveness. Open market, equal playing field. Yes, but is it not too much at some stage? And we heard a bit of this morning. From a commercial perspective, do we have instruments in place to support competitiveness in Europe, but also the competitiveness of our industry in the global scene? So let me introduce my guest here. And I need to switch here because I don't have any more my references, which I had earlier. Marco Foligno is the CEO of SpaceOpal, the operator of Galileo. We have also Frédéric Gustafsson, the Chief Strategy Officer of Inmarsat, the telecom operator. We have Angelo Fontana, the CSO of Aviospa, who is one of the launcher companies in Europe, the second one. Actually, the second one, there are other companies as well. There are actually new space players as well to be considered, especially in Germany and elsewhere. Benoit Depper, the CEO of Aerospace Lab.
Aerospace Lab.
Aerospace Lab, sorry, yes, my mistake. A manufacturer of a small sat, but also a service provider of intelligence services. And Olivier Lemaitre, the Secretary General of Eurospace, the trade association for the European space industry. So I'd like to start with SpaceOpal, with you, Marco. You are operating one of the critical infrastructure for Europe. You have, so let me just go back to because I need to switch now. I have been a bit disturbed by what happened a bit earlier. So we know Galileo is a success story, right? Providing concrete services to downstream and also to European institutions when it comes to precise positioning, secure positioning. What, in your opinion, given your success story, what do you think is needed to strengthen and protect the European Space Agency position in these strategic domains? And Galileo could be an example, actually.
Good. Okay, thank you, Thierry. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, Marco Foligno, just to say that the CEO of SpaceOpal, that is a joint venture between Telespazio and the LRGFR, and we are, let's say, the operator of the Galileo constellation, as Thierry said. So in this respect, of course, we could touch with our hand let's say, the success story of Galileo that started many years ago. And then maybe in order to understand what we could do to strengthen even more this position that Europe gained thanks to Galileo, let's try to understand what is behind this success story, at least according to me. First of all, we had, let's say, many years ago, a very firm and clear commitment from Europe that was at the base of the story. Of course, this took probably too much time. This morning has been stressed also the fact that we have to try to be a bit faster, especially when we have to gain and to, let's say, improve our positioning in a certain domain. But at the end, this was a first important step that then was reinforced by also a full commitment by member states. And this, let's say, resulted in having the right level of funding allocated across the different phase of the program, but also with a very strong commitment on the security of the system, on managing the critical national infrastructure, and so on. On top of that, let's say that there was a very great, in my opinion, cooperation among the different stakeholders, so institution, European Commission, ESA, USPA, and all the industry involved. And these, let's say, imply to then have a very well designed and technology-driven system, but at the same time, also a system that has been entrusted for service to the operator. And this is particularly, let's say, true and appreciated by us because in operating the system, we experience every day that the scheme to allocate the full responsibility to the operator, of course, is a big challenge for us, as a huge responsibility because Galileo is so strategic and critical infrastructure in Europe, but at the end, let's say, demonstrated, proved to be successful because, for example, just to give a couple of examples, in the last few years, we have to cope with the COVID pandemic, international crisis, and despite that, let's say that the service was not affected or nor degraded. And this is the real, let's say, evidence that the overall scheme and infrastructure is working. Just to give you an idea of the complexity, let's think that today we operate 28 satellites in orbit. We have to operate and maintain 2 control centers, of course, fully redundant by design. So this is, of course, in the direction of the resilience. And we also, 2 control centers, one is in Italy, in Fusion, the other one in Oberpfaffenhofen in Germany. Then we have a service center in Madrid, and also we manage many remote sites distributed worldwide. You can imagine that hundreds of highly professional, skilled people are involved to manage this complexity. And let's say an overall, let's say, operational concept is supporting all the delivery of this outstanding level of service. Saying that, what to do next? Of course, something is already in place because we have already in front of us the second generation of the Galileo that will bring additional benefit. Of course, we are speaking about, let's say, full electrical propulsion, satellite interlink, better accuracy, and this will stimulate for sure not new commercial services. Because already today, Galileo is the best system in the world in terms of performance, already is an enabler for the development of new commercial services, even more in the future. Of course, in order to maintain this position, I believe that we have to work on strengthen the cooperation among the different stakeholders, even more than in the past, maybe enlarge also the let's say the story to also small and medium enterprise, to boost innovation, to look at the, let's say, innovating technologies. Cost is an element because, of course, we know that this kind of program required a huge amount of funding that should be, in any case, still the institution should act as anchor customer, but we have to find maybe the right balances between commercial and public and private funding. And let me mention also timing, so cost, timing, performance that are there. And also to just to underline again what has been said before, I believe that we absolutely need availability of talent, of skilled people, of young
people, let's say, approaching space, because at least in our experience of industry, this is something that could create some, let's say, critical gap in the future.
Very good. If we want to make a small round, maybe a bit of an introduction, each of you as well, and a bit of context, basically, given what we've heard a bit earlier. Frederick.
Yes, thank you. Yes, hi everyone. So I'm Fredrik Gustafsson, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Inmarsat. And sort of as context where we sit, we see the SATCOM sector as a vibrant and competitive sector. There is a deep and vast ecosystem, significant capital and investment going in, which drives innovation and sort of serving evolving customer needs. So I think sort of the starting position is that this is sort of a sector which is competitive and delivers a lot of value to customers, including European customers. And we see that there are a lot of players. I think we counted it a while back and found there was 55 global satellites operators. It's a deep sector, broad sector. And on top of that, we also have now, obviously, Starlink coming in, entering. We have Amazon, who was on the previous panel, where we see players coming in, new players with significant capital and a very long-term view of market and when they will get returns. So we see that this market will continue, if anything, to be more competitive. We think this will drive further innovation. It will drive cost efficiencies, capex efficiencies, and probably also a consolidation further in the sector. We've started seeing that, and we'll see more of that. So with that market context, I think it's clear that Europe cannot stand still. They need to take some action, but I think that action needs to be well judged and fact-based. Has to be focused around very precisely which gaps we are trying to fill. Historically, we've seen examples, obviously, in Galileo. We had Copernicus, which sort of filled those gaps. But looking forward, I think that sort of precision to be really clear in terms of what needs to be done through this coordinated program versus what the sector will do will be important. And I don't know exactly all of what those things are, but I think there's sort of three themes that I see that where having that sort of top perspective will be valuable. One is just sort of looking across the value chain, top down, and then see where are the gaps that in terms of capabilities, technologies, and so forth, when you look at that top down, end-to-end perspective. And if there are gaps, how can those gaps be filled? How can we incentivize further innovation in those areas? The second area is around the policy and regulation to have an open, transparent regulatory system, also across borders, so that when we're rolling out solutions from one country, it's sort of easier and you reduce the costs and the barriers of rolling that out into other European countries. So the European Single Sky, for instance, is an important project there. And then the third thing I see is around, we talked quite a lot about this today, around the sustainability, where space sustainability, where I do think that there will be commercial solutions and there should be commercial solutions. But I think it's also quite clear that Europe can take an important role in terms of framing that discussion, setting up the policies and sort of defining the rules of the game so that then the commercial sector can engage.
And make it respected as well elsewhere. Right?
Yes, exactly. Yes. Setting the standard.
It's a global business by nature.
Absolutely. I think that's very important. And we see that too. We are a European-based company and sort of long heritage of working with European value chain and so forth. But it is a global market, and we are a global market, a global provider.
Thank you. Angelo.
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, sorry. First of all, apologies from Giulio Ranzo for not being here today. He could not attend this session. And I am Angelo, I'm CSO at Avio. Avio is a public company 50 kilometers away from Rome, and we do rockets. And in that sense, we provide Europe with autonomous access to space. I mean, I'd rather say we contribute to provide Europe with autonomous access to space, because we do this with the Vega launcher, along with the Ariane. They are the two launchers of the European fleet of launchers. So about Vega, the maiden flight of Vega was in 2012. So we have carried out the exploitation of Vega for 10 years by now. We made 20 launches, and in July 2022, we also launched the maiden flight of Vega C, which is the first step of the Vega evolution. It's a more performant, a more powerful, let's say, launch vehicle, able to carry up to 2.3 tons in its reference orbit, compared to 1.3 of the Vega, the first version. And well, we are ready now. After the maiden flight, we are ready now to carry out the second flight. It will be in November 2022. And I'm talking about access to space, which is crucial. But let me say, it's not only a matter of access to space, but also to do operations in space and to get back to Earth after being in space. And all of this will be delivered in a couple of years from my company, thanks to others' ESA program, namely, in particular, the Space Rider, which will be the European re-entry vehicle, so able to stay in orbit, to carry out experiments, and to get back to Earth, so to retrieve the payloads. That is why I'm saying that with this, Avio is ready also to carry out operations in space and to get back to Earth. We are also ready to deliver, in a couple of years, we will be ready to deliver the second step of the Vega evolution, changing the upper stage. We will see later on why this is crucial for us. And this is the Vega E. And yes, in a couple of years, you will see it flying along with Vega C, of course. So I think
Thank you.
I'm done for the time being.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
We'll have other questions on launcher and
Sure,
access to space.
I'm ready
Yeah.
to answer.
Benoit, thank you.
Thank you.
A bit of introduction and context, yeah.
Sure. So I'm Benoit Deper. I'm the founder and CEO of Aerospace Lab. Company was created 4.5 years ago. Project started in March 2018. We are reaching 200 employees now. And we are mostly focused on building microsatellites in the range of 100 to 500 kilograms, with a strong focus on 100 to 200 kilograms now. Strong focus meaning that we have a few in the assembly line. So we operate 24 satellites per year, small factory, 20 minutes outside of Brussels. And we are building a large factory, so 22,000 square meters, that should accommodate 500 of those not earlier than 2025.
Thank you. Olivier, please introduce yourself and a bit of context.
Yes, so Olivier Lemaitre, I'm Secretary General of Eurospace, the, as you said, trade association of the European space industry. So we are in a session today supposed to talk about our dependent situation. So perhaps very briefly, and sorry to draw kind of a black picture of the situation. So today in space in Europe, we have rising inflation. We have a rising cost of energy and of certain key materials. We have a strong competition to recruit talents. So basically, our situation is fragilized for the moment. Let's be clear, and it's important to take into account the fact that any further fragility increase the risk of dismantlement of part of the space industry workforce, which is dramatic because it's not enough known probably, but the people in the space industry are very often hyper specialized and very often detain a unique competence that can take a year to rebuild. So we'll be talking about technological dependence, but there is also critical competencies on which we rely. So now going to technological dependencies, it is true that indeed we rely on foreign supply chain in the space industry. We are procuring abroad to complete most of our space programs in Europe, mainly from the US, but not only. Just to set the picture, to set the scene, the dependence has two main routes. The first one is from technological gaps, obviously, that are associated with a very, very long-standing gap in R&D funding and a lack in actually efficient coordination of those very scarce funds. And the second root of the problem comes from market situation, because European domestic markets are not only very limited, but they are also fragmented. And the fact today that several member states in Europe insist of having their own national supplier of certain critical technologies, of course, it's not helping to achieve the necessary critical mass. And to make an analogy, think, for instance, in Europe about fighter aircraft, for instance. We have the same situation in technology. So that's it for the moment. I can complete for that.
So I'd like actually to jump on this, Olivier, if you want to continue a little bit. What can the European industry do actually to lessen its dependence on foreign supply chains? We talked about a skill shortage potentially. Are there other issues? I mean, you mentioned other issues as well. How can you optimize as an industry? We talk about fragmentation, but those players aim also to conquer the world. What would help actually?
As I said, one of the main problems comes from the very scarce available funds for research and development. And not only they are scarce, but they are basically uncoordinated. Let me take an example. I'm now becoming a bit old in the space sector. So in 2008, Eurospace requested an increase of the R&D efforts of around 150 million euro to solve the most critical dependent situation. I'm not even talking about achieving leadership. So also in 2008, the Commission, ESA and EDA, they set up the joint task force to identify the situation of critical dependency in Europe that are subject to risk. So unfortunately, the joint task force operated under very strong budget constraints. So there was basically no money, no serious money. And this focused nearly exclusively on identifying the most critical dependent situation, while leaving aside the dependent situation driven by competitiveness issues. And so recently, I mean, this year, the war has taken the joint task force by surprise, obviously, revealing completely unassessed critical situation. And besides, no coordination exists yet between the member states, ESA and the EU, to devise a joint coordinated approach for real technology strategy, and also a technology strategy that would finally take into account the constraints, the concern, the ambition of industry. Still today, the joint task force is not involving structurally industry. So yes, indeed. So the two main message.
So I hear strong messages here to the
main message:
the
better financing of research and development, better coordination of institutional effort, and please stronger involvement, structural involvement of industry in the process.
Okay. So perhaps I'd like to go to you, Frédéric. You've been involved. You're a leader in maritime communications in the maritime segment, and aviation as well. And you've participated to large-scale European programs like IRIS for air traffic management. I don't know if you could hear my question because I was a bit far away. Are such programs necessary to deliver innovation at scale, actually, in Europe? Where do you think, where would you like to see Europe accelerate, especially in areas where you in Marsat can contribute?
Yeah, so on that, I think firstly, as I said in my opening statement, that I think that the sector is vibrant, it's competitive. So I don't think necessarily that innovation is required to happen in these programs. But that said, I think there's also some programs we have participated in, which have brought where you can see some clear benefits of us working with ESA, for instance. And one of them is IRIS, as you mentioned. So this is a way of modernizing air traffic management, which we have now developed with a satellite solution to do so. And I think here you have some clear benefits between sort of private sector and the space programs. So this required, the background here is that the air traffic control and management system is sort of largely done on a country by country basis. There's a lot of inefficiencies here. And some real tangible benefits of digitalizing this and using satellites, which allows the aircraft to fly more direct. They will fly at the right altitude, and you have benefits of stacking aircraft more effectively when you come close to the airports and so forth. This adds up. So the benefits then tangibly is that, of course, you save fuel, which has a monetary impact. We estimated that in 2022, so this year, around 2 billion euros worth of fuel is sort of wasted due to the fact that the air traffic management system is not as efficient as it could be. And that will help the European aviation sector to obviously become more competitive. The sector has been under a lot of pressure recently because of COVID. But it also helps the environment. This helps to reduce the carbon emissions. Airlines are under a lot of pressure too. It's one of the sort of sectors that have fairly high contribution to overall carbon emission and is now under pressure to reduce that. And it also has benefits for the European air travelers. Congestion and delays is sort of one of the main frustrating factors now at the moment for European air travelers. So I think that that's a very good example of how we can sort of work together to deliver innovation and value for the consumer. And on that, I would also say that, sorry, I was going to say, and so that's for me sort of one of the main programs that we're participating in. There are others too, but that's one.
Benoit, you sit on two industries. You sit on the manufacturing, the upstream industry, but you also extend downstream by providing digital data analytics, especially targeting intelligence in various shapes. It's data analytics is becoming critical actually to understanding what's happening. So it's a complement basically to critical infrastructure. What do you think is the level of dependence basically of Europe when it comes to intelligence? And perhaps as a second part of my question, any reaction to what you heard about the from Olivier on what needs to happen?
I mean, I don't know, but even if I knew, I would not be able to talk about like dependency on the intelligence domain. It's something that is non-public anyway. So you're right. We're involved in hardware making with satellite design and building, but also analytics. I would say that right now the breakdown of FTEs working on both is like 90% hardware and 10% analytics. Why? Because we believe that there is still a lack in the data offering. So the analytics are quite poor, given the fact that you miss a lot of information content because revisit is not there and sensor diversity is not there as well. So first goal is to really bump the data offering by operating constellations with diverse sensors, different kind of payloads. And data analytics team on our side is really there to make sure that we can blend and mix this heterogeneous set of data and extract valuable information from that. But we are not there yet, and especially in Europe, there's a couple of players, but nothing in the scale that we can see in the US.
And you see the government as a large buyer of EU data, of intelligence data?
I mean, I believe that industry hopes that it will become the case, but right now it's kind of modest and it's at national level, not EU level. But we see it going into the right direction, just that it's a matter now of being all around the table, having an efficient governance process that would allow to increase, as Olivier was saying, increase the budgets, but also increase the agility into deploying those budgets.
Okay. A question here, perhaps for Angelo, and this is from the audience. Given the Commission's interest in protecting critical infrastructure, it is now time for the Commission to take part in the financing, or is it now time for the Commission to take part in the financing of Europe Spaceport, the Guyana Space Center? And that could be also not just for you, Angelo, but for anyone who benefits from access to space.
You said it's time for the European Commission.
Yeah, is it time for the Commission to take part in the financing of Europe Spaceport, the Guyana Space Center?
Well, of course, it is. It would be welcome for the Commission to be one of the funding operators of the European spaceports. You know, we are present in French Guiana. We run 3 companies over there, 2 along with Ariane Group, and 1 is 100% run by Avio. And this is for, of course, Vega integration and the launch infrastructures as well. These infrastructures belong to ESA for the time being, and we run them, we exploit these infrastructures to get the launch done. So if we had also additional funding from European institutions, so by the European Union, it would be more than welcome, and also for expanding what is the business right now. In French Guiana, for the time being, we launched 2 launch systems, Vega and Ariane. In the future, maybe it can become something bigger than that. Also for maybe it can host the return of the Space Rider, for example. And I know that there are plans to launch a micro launcher from French Guiana, for example. So this goes in the direction of expanding the business from over there, and we will be more than happy to.
And I think behind this question, there is a bit of a question of what are the, how the fixed costs basically manage, and are European launchers competitive, basically?
Yes.
That's a question underlying this.
When it comes to competition, I think there are 3 key parameters to take into account. First of all, the cost of the launcher, and eventually the cost of the launch service, of course, its availability and flexibility to carry out multiple missions, and its reliability as well. So while in the past decades, the key parameter was the reliability of the launcher, now it seems that cost has become the most important, the most relevant parameter in choosing one launch service or another. So the question is how, let's say, a legacy, an ESA-developed launcher like Vega, because we used institutional funds to develop Vega, can keep its cost low. Well, sorry to be blunt, but the answer here, it's we have a magic word to say that, and it is volumes, meaning that with volumes, we mean that we have to produce a certain number of launchers per year. That said, why this? First of all, because the greater the volumes, the lower the cost. It's simple and plain. So the question is, what is the best business model for us? It's a mix of institutional and commercial launches, missions. And I go straight to the point. So what do we need from institutions to get the cost low? I said we need volumes. We have to know that we rely on a given number of missions at a given price. If we have that, we are able to tune our production plants to know, to derive, to produce also a product, sorry for the words, to have a product also competitive on the commercial market. So using institutional missions to have a product that is perfectly suited also in the commercial market. This is the perfect mix of what we need. And it seems that this exploitation model works very well in other countries. I know what I'm thinking of.
Olivier, you wanted to react a little bit, if
No,
Angelo.
sorry, not to contradict Angelo.
Oh, thank you.
No, but to add, honestly, we should stop talking about this bullshit of the competitiveness of launcher. I mean, this is not a law of nature, huh? It's competitive because you decide that the price to put it on the market is less than the price than other. Let's take an example. When SpaceX launched a Falcon 9 for NASA usually pay between 80 million and 120 million. And when it's on the commercial market, the price is roughly 60 million euro under the control of Angelo. So, I mean, this is not happening because, as I say, by the law of nature, it's a decision at some point. So I do think that in Europe we do need independent access to space. We need to be efficient. We need it to be reliable. We need, of course, to be cost effective. But this obsession about the competitiveness is really artificial for me.
At least for the launcher sector, yes.
Thank you, Olivier, for saying that. I refrain from saying that, but thank you. I just wanted to add a short concept I was thinking about. It's not only a matter of selling as many launchers as possible to the European institutions. I want to reassure you. It's also a matter of strategy, of policy. And I make myself clear with an example. In 2014, Europe decided to go ahead with the evolution of the two launchers, so Vega, from Vega to Vega C, and from Ariane 5 to Ariane 6. And we Europeans, we decide to do that having a common element between the two launchers, not just a small box, an electronic box, but an entire propulsion system, so something very big. Why am I saying so? Because that element that is common to the two launchers, because it is the first stage of Vega and the boosters of Ariane, Vega C, sorry, and the boosters of Ariane 6, since it has to serve both the launchers, it is manufactured, it is produced in many items. So the rate of production of this element is high, is unprecedented, and this keeps its cost down. And the launcher, we hope, that will cost lower than the previous versions. So what I'm saying here is food for thought. Why don't we do the same for the next generation of launchers here in Europe? And I'm thinking to a next gen of launchers made up of a fleet made up of a small one, for example, a small medium one, a large one, and could be extended to a micro or an extra large one, a European fleet of launchers serving the European institutions and using building blocks, common elements. So This is a winning strategy, I'm sure about that, and we should reproduce this for the next generation of launchers.
Which is in a way what the upstream has adopted with the platforms, with a lot of common elements. So you need to kind of harmonize industry and get efficiencies through the supply chain.
Sure. The element I delivered before was about a propulsion element, a monster. Imagine 160 tons of propellants inside a case. It's a common element for both the launchers, and it's one example. We may have also avionics common between the two launchers. I'm just talking about the two existing launchers, but it could be extending at what is about to happen in Europe, other launchers, I don't know. So avionics, separation systems, for example. I don't know if structures, but it's possible to have common elements about talking about structures, but the technology behind the structure, of course, could be the same. I'm thinking about filament wound elements that are lighter, stuff like that, I think. It's not only about propulsion.
Regarding Galileo, Galileo is, GNSS are enablers, right, for a lot of industries. I'm talking about downstream now. How do you think, to which extent basically this is critical to Europe, and what are the lessons for the future?
In terms of commercialization,
Yes,
competitiveness.
commercialization, yes.
Of course, let's say that the asset that we have today, on which we can rely on, is an incredible starting point, in my opinion, for stimulating the introduction of new commercial services, let's say, also boosting the market of navigation services. Say that this is also possible not only because of the performance of Galileo as a system, but also because the overall program has been, in a certain way, conceived to stimulate the market. So you know that, okay, it's not just within Galileo, but periodically both the European Commission and USPA deliver a market study to assess the market, support the industry in, let's say, defining their own ambition and strategy. There is, the dedicated service center, also in which we are involved as SpaceOpal, that is conceived to, let's say, share experience among the user community, test a new solution, and, let's say, explore new possibility. On top of that, if we look at the, let's say, second generation that is upcoming, this will bring even additional, let's say, potentiality. In parallel, let's say that I believe that also the recovery resilience plan at the European level can complement this opportunity. Also because if you look at certain pillars such as green transition and digital transformation, for sure, let's say this kind of pillar can include a lot of opportunity in the navigation services. And you already are, we don't have to wait the second generation. Already today we can, let's say, many players doing already, you can, let's say, develop, innovate, propose to the market new commercial service. Just to give an example, based on the Galileo signal in SpaceOpal, we have developed an our internal investment in the last few years, an ad hoc solution for precise point positioning that is called Navcast, that, let's say, can ensure an accuracy of, we speak about centimeters. So you can imagine this kind of performance, which kind of benefit, how many benefits can bring in several market sectors, such precision agriculture, automotive, drones. Of course, still something is required in terms of technology, innovation, I don't know, user terminal, specifically tuned for the different market sector. But let's say we have all the element there. Of course, the investment required is important. So we need to also stimulate a bit the market. I don't know, again, institution could play an important role in, let's say, facilitate the transition to a full mature market. There are already instruments in place. NAVISP program is accelerator, but then maybe since we have this incredible asset that let's say give us European cities independence and sovereignty, we should maybe boost a bit, capitalize it. Yeah, thank you.
And Benoit, what about the EU downstream industry? I remember I did back in the 2000 the first status of the EU downstream industry. That was actually for ESA, and we saw that 20 years ago the downstream industry was far away from its potential. That potentially, there could be multiple. The demand could be multiplied by 10 or 100. And so there was structurally some issues about, having this industry thrive. But at the same time, more and more now, we understand that EU remote sensing, data analytics is becoming part of what you could call the critical infrastructure of Europe, because there are so many critical applications, actually. What's your view on this? How Europe could strengthen its capabilities?
I mean, if we are talking about Europe, apart from Copernicus, there is no real ecosystem. We have a couple of commercial players, but they don't. 20 years ago, they were operating at the same levels. They didn't grow that much in 20 years. And Copernicus was formerly GMES. The roots of this was maybe not even born, but Copernicus is a great program, but it should evolve, and it's evolving. I believe that we should see the emergence of new commercial players that would work alongside the next generation of the Sentinel satellites, so we can leverage long-term vision provided by institutional players, EC and ESA, taking care of this long-term vision, the stability of the supply of data, remote sensing data, for the greater good, with some distribution, open distribution policy that may change with the next generation of Sentinels. But this long-term stability is something we can build upon a commercial ecosystem. And this is, I believe, the way to go, and to shed a bit of light in these dark times. This is where we see ESA and EC involved with those type of thinking right now to how to set up this ecosystem with a contributing mission, with some other new instrument that may be set up in the future. So I'm quite optimistic that the next 20 years are going to be a bit more dynamic than the last ones.
Okay. Frédéric, I'd like to ask you, how is Inmarsat actually contributing to building European capabilities beyond what we talked about earlier, and what could be the ambition of also Inmarsat or satellite communication players in Europe?
Yeah, so I think we've talked about Iris before, and I think overall, a lot of what we do when we build capabilities, even though we are sort of a global company, a lot of that will benefit Europe because we work in the European ecosystem. I think one project I can talk about is EAN, so the European Aviation Network, where we combined with, we have a satellite which is combining with around over 300 ground stations to provide connectivity over the European airspace, so sort of a exclusive service for the European airspace, unique capability that delivers up to 100 megabits per second connectivity speed, and therefore also benefits European passengers. And this was an example of required some regulatory action around spectrum harmonization, and then Inmarsat, together with European partners, and investments, then built this and developed a 4G system. And what's clear here, it didn't happen sort of by itself. It quite a lot of hard work. It was around deep sector expertise. It was this partnering ability. It was the sort of taking well-judged technology risks and sort of innovation again there. But now, as I said, this is now providing a great service to the European sector and the passengers here. So I think that, I mean, with that, and as I said, even though we are a global company and innovating, operating global satellite sort of constellation, we are very much European company working with the European ecosystem and therefore sort of benefiting Europe both in the space segment but also on the ground segment. So that's where we're on that. And sorry, what was the last bit of that?
And did you see? First of all, it's not just satellite, right? It's also terrestrial. So that's also a convergence here for a specific application.
That's right.
Which is passenger communication.
Yeah. And I think that's also important overall. We talk a lot about technology and different technological solutions here, but I think it was very clear from a customer perspective that they just looking for they want to have that need, whatever it is, and they just want to have seamless connectivity. They care less around how this is being delivered, and therefore we should, I think, as operators here, think about what's that for the best way of delivering that sort of solution. How do we serve that demand rather than just forcing a specific technology?
Right. And you see, perhaps, it's a question to you, but also to Olivier, and actually all of you. How can the commercial sector be much more involved to actually help Europe build its critical infrastructure? And by critical, we understood, it's critical if it's strategic. It's strategic if you actually suppress that capability, we are in a big chaos, basically, trouble. And that's the meaning of strategic, unless you have other definitions. But at a European level, I would say that's probably one of the definitions. So how can the European industry contribute, knowing that there is agility in the industry, there are a lot of resources as well, human resources, bright people. How can the industry contribute?
Okay, two things perhaps, and I will not dig into the strategic autonomy concept, even less if you put open in front of it, then it just doesn't mean anything that you could be understood, but okay. Anyway, so I was proposing in the first part a few way forward about putting money in R&D and better coordination. I think we should perhaps start with a good mapping of where the issue are, and as a first step. So it's complicated, but perhaps there might be a very high-intensive work in actually mapping every single import that we do in Europe today. Perhaps it's too large, so we could perhaps start with import that we do for European space program that are delivering public services, and identifying in a systematic way what do we import, why do we import it, is it a question of price, is it a question of performance, is it a question of availability, of maturity. So it's resource intensive, obviously, but I'm pretty sure that identifying in a systematic way all those import situation and the reason why we import will help the European institution to improve very significantly the efficiency of the program that they will be launching. So on our side in industry, and I think it was exactly 1 year ago in this very conference, we launched the Eurospace, the ORDIN process, the way we call it. So it's a process that we have launched to connect the supply chain around a shared vision for technology strategy. So it's about workshops that are open not only to Eurospace members but to all the actors of the European supply chain. So we have moved beyond the pilot phase, and only in those 2 months of October and November, we will have a workshop about end-of-life solution technologies, about smart manufacturing and materials, about big data processing, about photonics. So all subjects that are high on the European agenda today. And they are really helping the industry to have a coherent, consensual, and shared view about where are the priorities. And our goal, of course, is to share those priorities with the European institution.
Any question from the audience? Actually, we have one over there.
Going back to this issue of critical technologies, very practical question, maybe for the ESA and EU and maybe the panel. Is there a dialogue between the private sector and the public sector on this observatory of critical technologies? And if the Commission can just elaborate if the intention is to discuss this openly or within private fora.
Was that a question to the institutions? Okay, yeah, you will. Okay, yeah. Any other question in the audience over there?
Thank you. My name's Steve Parks from Star Dundee. In the last session, Jeremy Wilks said it always comes down to the rockets. But with a triple E view, when the chips are down, it always comes down to the chips. And it's not only Europe that has technology dependencies. The USA has critical technology dependencies as well. For example, Taiwan and TSMC and the chip technologies that the USA and the whole world use from Taiwan. So my question is it appropriate to ask and fund TSMC to set up a leading edge fab in Europe?
I mean, you can ask me how to cure cancer as well. Huh? It's above my pay grade. So it's the EU chip act, and it's billions and billions of investment to be reallocated in Europe. I guess it's going into that direction, but will take time and resources. And if we look at what the US have been doing, they are trying to relocate a lot of this TSMC critical tech in the US. So I believe we should do the same. I'm pretty sure it's ongoing. The issue, and we always look back to that, is how quick and how agile can the EU governments be to make us not miss the target time-wise.
And we have a last question here, I think, on the front.
Yeah, I have a question for Angelo. I appreciated your point on the common building blocks for family of European launchers. It's pretty much in line with the ESA work on the Vision 2030. Which are your views of effective implementation of this vision?
Well, thanks for stressing this point, but I'm not an ESA official. So I know that ESA is eager to go ahead in this way. And when it comes to the implementation, you have ESA institutions on one side and you have industries on the other one. So I think that behind this strategy, we should find an agreement, an industrial agreement at European level to make this possible. And I think this is the hardest point to overcome to get this done, actually, because too many times in Europe we have overlap of national interest, and I'm sorry, maybe I'm a little bit blunt, we have an overlapping of national interest and a common strategy. So we are not so united, a union of member states, if I say so, but I think it is reality. So if we manage to have an industrial agreement behind this, I'm sure that we can cooperate to make what I said possible and be competitive not only today, but also in the future with our next generation of launchers. I think this is one way to pursue what I'm saying. It's not the only one, maybe, but again, we need to make an industrial agreement to support this view. And this is not done for the time being. We look forward to the ministerial conference, what can bring. I know that it will be for the next 3 years. What I'm talking about is about, I would say, beyond 2030. It's not today, but the day after today. So let's see.
And we have one question from the audience. I don't know if we still have a bit of time for that. Let's say quickly, is there a forum where remote sensing entities can work alongside the EU space program to evolve commercial information services and products in the form of SaaS, for instance, like software as a service, in sync with infrastructure development?
I mean, yes. The Copernicus program has many doors and some workshops and some sessions and some people are dedicated to that. So yeah, I'm not a sales guy for the Copernicus program, but go copernicus.eu and then find out, send emails.
Good. So I think Lauren has heard us. And one last question over there.
Yes, thanks. I'm Tommy from North Base from Finland. We're creating ground stations there. I'm kind of taking it from Angelo and also from the other presentations today. There's a question that has been lingering in my head, since the defense, and also because it's about when Luigi was speaking about speed, Ebert, Massimiliano, now Angelo was speaking about unity and stuff like that. And now when I think those are kind of, weaknesses of democracy. So if you want to be quick, then China, Russia are very fast because there's basically dictatorship. So there's no need for negotiation. While we have this thing that, now being from Finland, I know very well that, if we want to join NATO, there will be some players who want to benefit something and therefore will resist. And the same thing is in EU decisions. There's always somebody who wants to a national benefit or personal benefit or something like that. So basically my one point is that we need to raise above the daily politics in here. We really need to make this a big issue. And this is for the policymakers. And at the same time, Niklas was speaking about the ban of missiles and then somebody noticed that aggressors really don't care. So they will just, bang the satellites and who cares? They're not obeying rules anyway. So again, on international level, we need to raise above the international politics. So kind of unite. But how do we actually do this? What's the venue where we do it? I think it's something that, we can do within Europe. But even if we can't agree, then how can we agree? What's the institution on global level? So that we basically, the point would be that, hey, let's not do to space what we have done to climate.
Who wants to take that one? It's a hard one. And it may be something also for the European Commission and ESA. But any
Yes, I think it's pretty time that we reform the treaties.
All right. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you all for this interesting debate. And now I'd like to welcome both Torben and Isabella to give us their, what they make out of it, their thoughts. Yes, please.
Now we have 5 minutes to summarize. So I'm not going to repeat what has already been mentioned by my colleagues in the panel. Just a couple of observations from our side, from the institutional chair, as it was mentioned at the beginning. Let me try and answer first very quickly the question about the EEE and the complexity of the value chain. I mentioned that in my short introduction. What we do now, spear pointing ahead with the EEE initiative, is really addressing the most critical components. And obviously, we will not be able to set up foundries in Europe as we have them in South Korea and Taiwan. This dependence will remain for quite some time. And if the question was, should we set up such foundries in Europe? I think we should. We can't do it within the funding schemes that we have available now. I hope that the CHIPS Act of the Commission, which should take off in a couple of years from now, will help us in that direction to establish a non-dependence also for I would say the semi or raw products that we use for our EEE components. The dependency that we need to develop, Olivier was mentioning this, where to focus. Obviously, we need to have a very smart and intelligent look at all the dependencies that we have and identify based on certain criteria. And the important one is risk, geopolitical risk, economical risk, as to where to focus first. And I think that's a common denominator of what has been discussed and many of the answers that we have received this afternoon. A couple of points that I would like to mention within the remaining 3 minutes that I have is, I think it is clear, and we mentioned this earlier, from the various answers that we have received from our panel members, being in operation, being it launchers, being it infrastructure, and being all of it that Olivier is representing. I think a common denominator is that we really must in Europe invest more. How can we make our launchers compatible? We can only make them compatible by having volume. How can we make the industries that we are establishing competitive and resilient? We can only do this by having volume. So we must invest and we must make sure that these programs come to life and that they fly on European launchers. Another point that I want to bring up that I think was a common denominator is the strong institutional cooperation and the governance. Now, it was mentioned, how come we cannot agree? I think it is not right to say that we cannot agree. We certainly can agree in Europe, and we have achieved fantastic things already. We heard mentioned the best navigation system in the world. I think we have the best Earth observation program in the world, and Copernicus has been mentioned, and we are the best in many other areas. We can agree. It may take a little longer than some of the other countries that were mentioned, but we certainly can agree. So maybe what we need to learn is to agree faster. And I think that what we need is to have this governance with a vision that will allow us to set up a strategy and allow the decision takers to take the decisions faster. And I think we can do that. Technology was mentioned, the technology strategy. I fully support the input that we have received that the technology strategy should not be derived from one entity within Europe. It should be a common technology strategy. So that means the Commission, it means the European Space Agency, it means national agencies, and foremost, it means industry. And we really need to do that so that we can set priorities, use the money where they should be used best and first. And this we can only do when we develop common technology strategies. On the observatory, Isabella would have to answer that. I have 1 minute to go that was mentioned. I was just Last point that I would like to mention is the commercialization. I mentioned in my introductory talk that commercialization is important for ESA. We are intending to really shift gear on the commercialization. We have within our package a small program called Scale Up, which will be building upon the commercialization that we are already doing in the various directorates. It is important. The commercial space will be growing significantly. But I think a takeaway from the discussions that we have heard this afternoon is that commercialization, a prerequisite for a strong commercial private space in Europe is a strong and very agile institutional space program. It needs to go hand in hand. Many of the examples that we have heard, being it launchers, being it the operations of the Galileo, being it air traffic, is very much based on hand in hand between institutional and the private sector. Strong institutional means a strong private sector in Europe. My last comment, STEM, the young people. We need to focus on education. We can increase manifold our budgets. We can try to increase our space industry, but we cannot do this without talented engineers. And we really need to focus, as we do in the Commission and as we do in ESA and as is done elsewhere, on building up these competences and stimulating the interest to entering into this fantastic world called space ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will be even briefer and excuse myself because then I have to run back to the office. I think that Torben covered already many of the topics that were raised during the discussion. I think that, as I said at the beginning, we are not lagging behind. The industry, the expert today show how we are really state-of-the-art technologies, infrastructure, services. We have to keep it in Europe. This is what we are working now. We have to work on the resilience of the infrastructure, the resilience of the supply chain to avoid disruption if kind of emergencies or crisis, and we have to work on the competitiveness of the space ecosystem in Europe. I think that many instruments were already mentioned. I think that also for the governance, already having one unique space regulation is helping in this direction. The space regulation set up a new governance also with ESA and the EUSPA. To streamline, we have the action plan on synergies because we have to build on synergy with space and defense. And we have now an expert group with the industry. Because indeed a lot has to be done and we have to develop strategies to focus on what is critical and what is key. So we have already Horizon, we have Cassini, we have many instruments, and indeed the Observatory of Critical Technologies will be used to set up roadmaps to focus investment. The observatory will be done with the contribution of member states and with the industry. I think there was already a presentation in the expert group that we have with industry on the plan to develop the observatory. What is critical is that obviously if you want to be effective, we have to work with information that have not to be public available. So to be really a strong instrument cannot be a public instrument. It has to be transparent, but the level of information we try to achieve, that we aim to achieve, is really to support our ecosystem to be resilient in case of shocks, not only in the space, but also in the defense sector. On launchers, I already mentioned that what we are doing, because in any case, the regulation already set up new action for the European Union on launchers that was not before. So we are aggregating the needs of the components of the space program. There will be more stability to already establish prime in the launcher industry. And as the Commission is work as anchor customer, providing them and we will also achieve our needs, but also now we are investing on the full ecosystem of launchers, so to develop new technologies and to support also new companies and micro launcher solution and greener solution. I think that Other many important aspects were recalled today. The importance of services, why we need a resilient and competitive space ecosystem, because now we are more and more depending on space data and services in our everyday life, for our defense and security, for our economy. And so we need to ensure that the services are always provided in a reliable manner. But also it was mentioned what is important to have skills and the right skills and available at the moment. Was also mentioned it's important to have the government and the speed. The institutions are always, we have to build on member states, on common policies, but I think we are also increasing our speed of reaction. As you know, the regulation is setting up for a longer period, but in the meantime, you already react with many actions to try to speed up. And again, I would just to thank you also all the speakers for the insightful discussion. And I think that was Torsten, but as other mentioned before, we can achieve to the success of European space if we work all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and join me in congratulating the speakers for this very interesting session. Thank you.
Thank you.